Okay, well, first of all, congratulations for staying quiet for a minute. Thank you very much for that. Have we got the microphones floating around out in the audience? Yet? I'd like a few people, there's one down there, I'd like a few people just to give me some examples from any one of those three, what they want to get out of it, reflection of something conscious they've done in their business. Just throw some stuff up. It could be a question for the panel, which we'll take for later on. Anyone? Anyone at all? Yes, we've got one down here. Thank you, sir. And one over there. Do this one first.
What does it mean?
Okay, great. That's going to be my first question, so thank you for that.
Something conscious that we have done in the last week is we run a social enterprise that's a complete financial disaster. And it really my job is to try and turn it around without shutting it down yet. And so what we have done in the last week is set up a whole list of data that we're going to gather in the next few weeks on the previous 3 years. So financial data, performance data, it's a store, so we're interrogating the whole point of sale system to find out what's actually been sold. We've done a customer survey, we're doing a second customer survey to find out further information. So we're gathering a whole lot of data to be the basis of decision making. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for your contribution. Okay, so how are we going to run this session? We're going to have a bit of a conversation up here. Feel free to listen in, and then we'll just basically hand it over some questions from the floor. We basically get a bit of a grounding so everybody gets to feel for what we're talking about, and then that will spark questions from down there, and we'll end up taking some questions from you guys. So I suppose the first question, to reflect the lady down there, is I might ask Jan to start with. What is a conscious business?
Right, hi everybody. So I guess a successful conscious business is going to be a business that is successful financially, socially and environmentally. So I'm with Hub Australia. Hub is a collaborative co-working space and learning. We also do learning events. We have a hub in Melbourne, in Sydney and in Adelaide. We're also a B Corporation. And Danny from Small Giants is also one of our investors. So we aspire to be successful across those three measurements. And actually becoming a B Corp has assisted us greatly because it showed us some very sort of tangible metrics to hold ourselves accountable to. And we had to do a little bit of work to sort of get the score to become a B Corp. But it really sort of helped us sort of pull ourselves up. So I would say that's it in a nutshell for us.
And so, Danny, what is B Corp?
I guess, just to get a sense from the audience, who, put your hand up if you know about B Corporation. So most people do. I guess to give you a brief summary, and when we talk about conscious business for us, actually maybe I can give you just a really brief background. We read a book called Small Giants, my wife and I, about 6 years ago, and we'd already started developing what we thought would be our business, which is now called Small Giants. But we read this book, and the subtitle of it, Small Giants, companies that choose to be great instead of big. And it was quite amazing that that in this book, it was, I don't know if anyone's read Jim Collins' Good to Great, so like the classic business book, and Jim Collins is wonderful, and he sort of says, okay, let's take these great companies and try and identify what made them great. But his definition of great was incredibly profitable. They had to be Fortune 500 and have consistent growth over 10 years of, 20% and blah, blah, blah. And all these things, how he defined great and came up with some wonderful principles. So the book Small Giants was written by a guy named Bo Burlingham. And what he did is similar to Jim Collins. He said, I want to work out, what makes a company great and try and, sort of determine what are the elements of that. But instead of determining great by, size, will determine to buy something else. He wrote for a magazine called Inc., so it was all about private companies, and you don't get, access to the numbers for private companies, so you can't find out, what their revenue is and what their profit is and all this stuff, so you can't really compare them on that same level. So he asked around to people in all over America, excuse me, and he said, what companies do you love? What companies are just completely inspiring to you? And he got a list of 17 companies that really shone. Right? I'm sure there were a lot more, but these were the 17, and he started looking into them and trying to understand what made them so great. And for us, that was sort of the original idea behind how do you determine the value of a company if it's not just about a bottom line. And this book, Small Giants, of course, looked at things like, the relationship that company had to its community, why everyone loved it. And, each of the companies had a purpose and a mission. So some wonderful elements. So we called ourselves Small Giants, and we continued. Excuse me, I'm a little bit sick. My kids, it's their fault. And we looked at Small Giants, and then more recently we came across B Corporation. And I guess I'll give you that little bit of background because I want you all to read Small Giants, and it's a great book. But B Corp was kind of like they took this idea, even though they didn't know about Small Giants, they took the idea of Small Giants and basically systematized it. And they said, okay, well, if Small Giants, like Good to Great, was just here are 5 or 6 principles, what B Corporation did was said, well, we're going to set a whole group of metrics around those. So Small Giants is a certification around business that looks at 4 main areas, but within those areas there are lots of broad questions around governance, around community, around environment, and around employees or workers. And how do you relate to each one of those stakeholders to your community? And if you get above a certain level, so there's a certain standard, and above, then you can basically become a B Corporation. So it's like the Heart Foundation tick or a fair trade, on a product. This is a company that would go through the certification. You've got your policies and your operations are above that standard, then you can become a B Corp. So for us, Small Giants naturally sort of shifted into the B Corp space once we saw that there was this rigorous process.
Great. Now, Michael, you weren't aware of B Corp or conscious capitalism or conscious business when you set up Mark Lawyers. Were you conscious when you set it up? And also, how have you made it such a success? What have you been doing?
If I was you, I would be wondering why a lawyer is on this panel at all, which is a completely fair question because there is no industry less conscious than the law.
Investment bankers?
Yes, true. Yeah, you win. I started our firm 5 years ago, and I wasn't aware that it was a conscious business until Paul told me. We started our firm off the back of, in my case, 20 years of experience working in big law and all of the horrors that go with that. And we were driven by 2 things, and we continue to be driven by 2 things. One is to start a revolution in legal practice, and the other is to be lawyers and happy at the same time, which is revolutionary as well. And we relegated the pursuit of profit to a consequence in our minds. That was what we figured. If we got everything else right, we'd make money anyway. It's true, we did. My understanding of consciousness, how I feel about it in terms of business, having sort of latterly discovered that what we'd been doing was aligned with a whole body of thinking. But my understanding of it is that consciousness is about knowing the answer to the question why. Why is this business in existence? Why is it doing what it's doing? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And money is not an answer to that question. I don't think I think there is an infinite number of possible answers to that question. It could be environmental, it could be sustainability, it could be the good of society, it could be just having a good time. But the pursuit of profit is, in the abstract, mindless, and consciousness is about having a higher sense of meaning.
Cool. Okay, so take that a little bit further, and I open this out to anybody here. So if making money is not the definition of success for a conscious business, then what is? What are the metrics, whether quantitative or qualitative, that allow you to define the success of a conscious business? That's to anyone.
Well, I'll say I don't do metrics, but I think success is what you define as success. If you just wanted to get together, build something amazing, and lose money, and that was your definition of happiness, then to me that would be success. There's no necessary conflict between measuring success in some way other than profitability and profitability itself. You can have both. But I do resist any temptation to try and put metrics around it, because I think, as I said, I think it's infinite, the possibilities. But
I'd say what we've noticed at Hub is that Hub is a very generative environment. Our hubs are full, bustling. All the teams and individuals who work in the hubs, their businesses are generative. I know working at Hub is like my dream job, and we aspire to, make all of our teams have a really positive experience. We actually think it's really important, the team culture. We need to get that right in order to also serve our members. So although we're not making millions of dollars, we are profitable, and we also are doing what we can to take care of the environment. So I would say that we're pretty successful.
Oh, and Danny, you do have some metrics, don't you?
So be healthy. No, I mean, rather metrics. We did, when Barry and I, Barry's my wife, who we started Small Giants together, when Barry and I first started, we wrote a business plan. And remember, we took it to a few advisors, and these were our measures of success. And I just wrote them down. It might have been worded slightly differently, but ultimately these are the five main areas: have fun, be inspired, spend time with people we really like, make a difference in the world, make change, and be sustainable. And we put that down. I remember an advisor said, well, hold on, but you have no financial metric. I said, I've got a metric there. It's be sustainable, right? And they said, well, that's how do I understand that? I said, well, if this week we need $20, then we need to make at least $20. And if next week we make $20,000, then we're going to need to make at least $20,000. And at whatever point it is in time, as long as we're aware of our costs, then we know what sustainable ultimately looks like. And when your costs are more than your revenue, it's unsustainable. That's a pretty straightforward way of understanding it. And it was quite interesting because, we found that quite a lot of people found that very, very challenging, particularly as an investment fund. But the other things were quite nice. What happened is one time a business, and we still, by the way, run by those, by and large, when we look at how well a business is going, we ask, are we having a lot of fun? And 1 to 10. Are we being inspired by that business? Another 1 to 10, etc. And one of our businesses wasn't doing very well financially, it was making a slight loss. And that was still a challenge because it's not achieving a very important part of it. But at one stage we're saying, well, do we cut it? When do we cut our losses on this one? It's making a loss. But when we looked through the list, it actually got 10 out of 10. It was Dumbo Feather. If you guys know the magazine, it's amazing. Doesn't make money, but amazing. But when when we had a look at it and we said, are we having fun? And it's a really fun magazine to be a part of. We write it and we're incredibly inspired by the people that we get to meet through it. You know, we get to hang out with incredible people. We went to New York with the kids on a holiday last month and met up with one of the people we'd interviewed, and it was like just the best day ever. Make a difference in the world, yes, and be sustainable, no. And I just thought, well, if you had 5 measures of success and you've got 10 out of 10 on 4 of them, but the last one is struggling, is that a reason to dump it? Or do you need to really invest hard to try and get that last one back up to sustainability? And for us, that was really interesting, because at one stage, you know, the sort of, you know, the traditional, the orthodox voice in our head was saying this is not financially sustainable, dump it. When we went back to our intention, we realised that this is adding so much value to our lives that it would be an insane decision to let it go. At least without trying to bring it to that sustainability. Cool.
Michael, back to you. You're obviously in an industry where you're saying there's a sort of lack of consciousness. Are there any other businesses that would find it extremely hard to act consciously, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many industries live in a paradigm where over time it's, you know, the pursuit of profit or shareholder return or return on equity or however you want to call, whatever you want to call money, has become you know, the sole measure of success, and it's quite difficult, I think, to break out of that, particularly where you've got external stakeholders, shareholders, investors who are not in the business and who don't have an emotional stake in it. And so shifting that around, I think, you know, it'd be incredibly difficult. I think, you know, industries like banking would are finding it very hard to make meaningful shifts. Although, you know, there's sort of increasing volumes of talk and interest in concepts, not just sustainability, but doing good, making your staff happy, that kind of stuff. But it's still very much in the framework of also making sure we deliver a profit of $6 or $7 billion a year to the shareholders. Therefore, you know, yes, will be good to the world, provided it doesn't conflict with that outcome. So that's hard. I don't have an answer to it. I mean, the answer I ever give when people ask me, how could you be conscious in a large multinational corporation? I say I don't care, because I don't work for one, and I don't see how personally. But you know, that is a challenge.
But in terms of sort of investing in those sort of companies, and you talked about shareholder return. So, Jan, you mentioned earlier that Small Giants invested in Hub Australia. Do you know why they invested in you?
So when I knew I was going to be on this panel, I actually wrote to Danny and asked him if he would tell me why. So I have 2 options. I have it written down here and I can read it out, or I can ask Danny directly. What would you prefer, Danny?
We'll see if I got it right.
Okay. All right, so Danny said, I really like and trust Brad Krauskopf, who's Hub Australia CEO, and the Hub management. This is a hugely important criteria for Small Giants. Brad is aligned philosophically, is commercial, and yet has the same big picture change agenda as us. We saw the need for a space like this, a hub to bring people in the field together. We understood the business model, and although we're not making millions of dollars, it is solid. It has been such an important and wonderful part of the social enterprise fabric in Melbourne, I can't imagine what we would do without it. I wouldn't have met a quarter of the people I have if it hadn't been for the hub. So thank you, Danny, for your words and for your support.
Yeah, I might say, and maybe, you know, this isn't sort of scientific, but I think one of the things that we also look for, I guess, from that perspective is things that speak to us. You know, like it's always products or services or ideas that we would use. So that's a big thing. When, you know, before Hub, it was kind of the place that I wished we'd had, so that I could go and find out who, and before conferences like this, find out who else is around. And so when we look for a business to invest in, we're also asking, is it solving a problem that we have? And then even more importantly than that, and what Jan said in the beginning, is does the management share our vision of the world we're trying to create? Because otherwise you always come up against tensions. And I guess that's maybe preempting a future question, but that's the challenge between a conscious business and a conscious investor. And I think an unconscious investor in a conscious business can pull it very far away from its vision. So I think, you know, there's a big element of getting the right investor into a business when you've got a deeper set of values. And, you know, Michael, you might find that as well, that, you know, who you bring in is as important as the values you have inside already.
Yeah, well, I mean, our investors are in the business, being you know, like most professional firms, the owners work there. So it's critically important that there's a commonality in values and purpose. That's it's a very important thing from a selection point of view. But if you added the complexity of external investors to that, then yeah, it's like not going there. But yeah, that'd be hard.
All right, I think I might put this out onto the floor now and see if there's any questions from you guys for anyone on the panel. Anyone at all? There's one just down here. And we'll go up there next.
Just a really simple question, probably for Jan. At Hub Australia, do you only take take businesses under your wing who you think are conscious businesses, or have a social impact lens? And if not, if you take people who only have profit as the bottom line, how do you manage the interaction in the Hub space between people who are consciously minded and people who don't also have a conscious mindset?
Yes, it's really interesting with Hub. Hub is a bit of a self-select in, self-select out. It has been to date. And I think that's because, in a way, we've set the Hub up with a very sort of mindful culture. So the Hub is cross-sector, so corporate, government, entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, educators, students, consultants, startups, small businesses. So there's also cross-generational, half men, half women. So there's a lot of diversity, but I would say the values are what is shared. So a certain type of person will come into the Hub, people who tend to be collaborative, and it's almost like they pick up the vibe, and they're either attracted to it or they're not. So it's very diverse, profit, non-profit. And the beautiful thing is, because people who are drawn to Hub are very sort of generous in nature, people really want to support one another. They're very generous in sharing their skills, their knowledge, their resources, and that's why it's such a generative environment. So it's definitely like a win-win for everybody. And it's very sort of easeful too, that if somebody doesn't feel like they naturally fit there, the model is set up so it's very flexible. It's like you pay by the month, so it's very easy to come in and very easy to leave.
Paul Steinford, PSA Project Management. Michael, in terms of talking about the major corporates and their money being the only measure, have you or any of you come across the balanced scorecard and other ways of getting big corporates to be able to measure and still achieve the financial objectives, but community and other values as well?
Yeah, yes, have come across the balanced scorecard and triple bottom line reporting and all of that stuff. I guess, and you know, it's worthy. It's better than being consciously evil, as some corporations still are. But I mean, to me, the challenge in it is that you kind of got a choice. You can choose to, or take sort of as the optional extra being good. So whether that's sustainability or social engagement or pro bono works or whatever, you can choose that option as the sort of yes, it would be good if we did these things rather than bad things. But if that sits behind or in lower priority to the profit driver, then there's an inbuilt conflict in your business, and the test is when you come to the crunch, when you have to make a choice between those two things, and businesses frequently come up against that. For me, that's not a comfortable position to be in. But I think it's kind of a necessary transitional step. But it's also there's also a danger in it that that kind of approach can become an alternative to doing anything real. So anyone can come up with a checklist that they can tick and say, yes, we do good. We do good. Any business can do that, but there are, you can think of some corporations out there who I'm sure are doing extremely well on the balanced scorecard or whatever metric they're using, and are doing untold damage to the environment or their own staff or communities or whatever. And I wouldn't feel very comfortable existing in that kind of ecosystem. So I think it's risky. That's my view.
Could you also imagine that there could be some that are able to actually do some good through that?
Well, anyone can do some good, absolutely. And it's, as I say, it's better than doing harm deliberately. And it's difficult. I think certainly for large corporations, it's difficult for them to envisage doing anything else other than taking that kind of procedural approach, I guess, to turning the ship around and being more conscious, being more good, and hopefully that will sort of give some hope to people within those businesses, those corporations, and maybe enlighten their board, maybe even their shareholders eventually, to think, well, actually, we could bring those kinds of things up to the front rather than the back of the list of priorities and drivers of the business. That would be nice to think of.
Are there any other questions from the floor? Can you wait for the microphone? Thanks.
Just to follow on a little bit from your comments there, do you think you can be ethical and achieve scale and become a big corporation, I guess, and still be ethical? Or is there a point where the contradiction rises?
Well, I think it's worth an effort. Like, I think that ends up being a really personal choice. Like, I've decided I don't want to work in a big business ever again because I just found it too compromising. But I'm a bit of a purist, and I've got the luxury of 20 years of doing it, so I can afford to be religious about it now. And there are businesses that need scale to be able to do what they do. Not as many as we like to think, but there are. But there are massive challenges. There's anyone who's worked in a business of 30 people that's become 100 knows exactly what happens when you add that kind of scale. So take that up to 500 or 1,000 or 10,000. Those challenges just keep multiplying in terms of how you communicate, how you maintain commonality of values, how you how you pursue a vision. And if you're trying to be pure to an ethical approach or a consciousness or a purpose as a big group of people, that's really hard because we're all human and fallible and often stupid. And so, you know, so many things can go wrong. So many more things can go wrong in an organisation of 20,000 people compared to an organisation of 20. It just, yeah, you know, you're going to spend a lot of time in meetings. I used to spend a lot of time in meetings, and I'm not going to do that again. But, you know, I'm not telling anyone what to do.
I think I agree to some extent, but I have seen some quite large companies hold that magic. I think there's an element of, and again, it comes back down to conscious business. There's an element of intention, and I think that if a company comes to the marketplace with a certain intention, and the investors or shareholders come with that same intention, and maybe even Australian Ethical is an example of a listed company that's held very true to its values. And it's, you know, got its challenges and ups and downs and ins and outs, but ultimately the value, or the intention to do good has never been compromised, even with investors. But they came in knowing that that's what they were buying into. And my sense, I guess, to your question before about big companies, I think it's very hard when you've got people who have bought in for one reason and then you're trying to shift them to another. So if you have shareholders in Telstra, you know, who came in, you know, not because it's a social enterprise or it's a B corporation or it's trying to say our job is to, you know, to look after, you know, all the households in Australia and make connectivity our core value. When you start coming back to that and say, okay, we're going to invest in this stuff, you've got to bring a lot of people on that journey. So I think that there's an interesting element of how you bring people onto the journey in the first place. And it's much easier to hold that, I think, you know, if you maintain the shareholders or the investors on that journey. What's interesting then is then how do we shift? And my question, because I think, you know, the big companies are, you know, the behemoths, the powerhouses of the world, and our job, you know, part of our job, I think, to create change is, one is to bring alternatives to market. Can we disrupt the market by bringing alternatives, you know, small companies, and make them large and compete? And the other one is, how do we infiltrate the large companies and shift them? You know, it's sort of like one way or the other. If we want to shift the global marketplace, they're the two ways to do it. So I think there must be a way to shift the large ones, but then you're talking about creating critical mass inside to change, and we just haven't seen much of that yet. And I think maybe it's because of the distance of the investors to the company itself. So in other words, you know, they're so far apart, this mass of investors in the marketplace, generally investing through institutional investors, that it's so hard to actually come back to the personal, to the values, which is where this stuff comes from. You know, consciousness has to come from a human being. It doesn't come from an inanimate object. So connecting humans to the business, I think, will help us find them moving in that direction.
I think we've got time for one more question.
So that's a great segue, Danny. So I'm looking for a bit of a, you know, the world in 50 years' time. As I heard that corporations are the powerhouse of the world, but I think small businesses are really the backbone of Australian enterprise. And getting to your point around, is the tail wagging the dog? I.e., you know, Paul can only invest in listed companies because he'd love to invest in smaller businesses, and I think you're looking at a few vehicles to actually do that with, and you're certainly doing that with Small Giants. And the whole Small Giants book, when I read that, you know, 10 years ago, you know, the palpable excitement of everyone who worked for that company, the contribution they made in their communities, and now we're seeing this is becoming a new economic driver, the multiplier of small businesses doing great things in their community, procuring locally, selling locally, very strong trading internationally because of that local strength. You know, is the world in 50 years going to be where we don't have these corporations because they're just not going to be able to compete against mighty, powerful, you know, small giants?
I think you're right, and I think that, like, the small business is or has the potential to be the backbone, but I sort of imagine it as you've got 10 pawns, you know, or 8 pawns on a chessboard and one castle. And, you know, the 8 pawns are more powerful than the one castle, but if they don't work together, the castle will win. You know, those who play chess, the castle is a strong piece. And so I think you're right. Conceptually, small business is incredibly powerful in Australia, around the world. In Germany particularly, I think it's called the Mittelstand. Somebody might be able to pronounce that better. But it's kind of that you know, middle band of businesses that really control the entire economy. And incredibly powerful. These are sort of, you know, private, you know, sort of successful private businesses. But when we don't work together, when we have no coordinating voice and power, then we're just all pawns on a chessboard in all different places, not protecting each other, not backing each other. So I think you're right. I mean, if somebody can work out a way, and maybe, I mean, conferences like this, for us, B Corporation is a stamp and a calling card for those types of businesses. And we figure if we had 1,000 B corporations, then we could lobby for, you know, government legislative change around business. So it's about who's, you know, whatever. I mean, you know, B Corporation is one, conscious capitalism is another movement that, you know, we work very closely together, but it's trying to pull the, you know, exactly what you're saying, these small little pocket rockets together and create change. But that's what we need. We need that coordinating. Otherwise, you know, each one of us on our own are just running around shouting, but, you know, no one loud enough for anyone to hear.
I'd just also like to speak to the fact that both PwC and NAB are partners of this conference, and they both also work out of Hub, and we're seeing a lot of collaboration between corporates and small companies. So I think it's a both and rather than either or.
Yeah, I'm with you, brother. My personal view, I mean, I agree with everything Danny said. My personal view is that we are actually at the beginnings of a generational shift. So, you know, some sort of core beliefs of our capitalist world are starting to shift, and one of them is that size is always good. Size is always the answer. That, you know, that the measure of success for a business is growth, and I think that is coming under challenge now, and it, you know, it's being questioned. Well, what does that mean? Why is size always better? And one of the reasons for that is that this another core belief that size always delivers economies of scale is very clearly in most industries crap. It certainly is in my industry. There are no economies of scale in law at all. The only thing size gives you as clients is more cost in my industry. But so that's, you know, a lot of these things are, a lot of these sort of just givens are starting to come under question, and that's opening space for small business, for small industry to walk into. And I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about, you know, one example of the sort of seemingly unstoppable march of Woolies and Coles across the landscape as they take over the art of grocery buying. And, you know, I shop there like we all do for convenience and because they're cheaper and because parking's easy and whatever. But I just have this feeling that at some point they're going to get to complete oligopoly or close enough to, and they'll have shut everyone else out of the market. And I'll be shopping at Woolies, and then one day some brave enterprising fool is going to open a corner grocery store just near my house, and he's going to be more expensive, but he's going to know my name, and I'm just going to go there. And I think, you know, that'll be awesome. You know, I think 50 years' time, yeah, I reckon things will be different. I think there'll still be big corporations stalking the landscape like a bunch of, you know, dinosaurs, but there'll be a lot more small, nimble, fast-moving businesses in all sorts of industries you probably didn't expect. And bearing in mind also in 50 years, most of the jobs will be jobs we don't actually know will exist. So, you know, who knows? But yeah, I know I'm optimistic. Vive la revolution. And
Fantastic. So well, there's a lot of hope and also some strategy there for the future. I'd like to sum up before we thank our panel, just to answer the first question we got, which was, what is it? I suppose you could sum up a conscious business as one that works in the best interest of all its stakeholders. So it looks after its people who want a good wage, fun, balance between their life and their work, the owners who want a return on their investment, the community that needs support, and the environment that needs our protection. And what's the driving force behind that conscious business? It doesn't have to be just money. So I think that's how we define a conscious business, and I really hope that's the future of business going forward. So if you can all join me in thanking Danny, Jan and Michael. And I believe it's